back seat.
All right, well, I guess we'll get started. I want to just thank everyone for coming tonight. I'm Mike Riccitelli, and I was one of the forum members that served on the superintendent search form that the Board of Ed created back in June to assist with the process. And
I'm Mike Bowler. I'm also a forum member. I was an at-large member along with Mike on the forum.
So I just have a statement that I'd like to read. We're here today to inform the parents and residents of Orange about the seemingly flawed process that was used by the Board of Ed in the recent search for the new superintendent of schools, and to make sure that the right choices are being made by our elected officials with regards to the Orange educational system and the interests of our children. The process in question was extremely closed, not transparent, and not collaborative. It was not consistent with prior searches conducted in this town for superintendents or principals. There was little, if any, input from any groups outside of the Board of Ed, and it was pushed through from start to finish in about 45 days. There was no need for such a hasty decision, as the current superintendent is under contract through the end of the calendar year. As poor as this process was, the most troubling issue is that the Board of Ed did not comply with its own rules and regulations. The board's policies stipulate that they form a search committee prior to commencing with a superintendent search. The basis of forming a search committee speaks directly to the concept of having an inclusive, collaborative effort to find and hire the best candidate to lead our school district. According to the Orange Board of Ed policies, regulations, and procedures, this search committee is to have a specific composition of members, and the committee has designated duties and responsibilities, including to seek the advice and counsel of a broad variety of groups within the district, receive all applications, and interview and pre-screen the most promising candidates. The forum that we served on undertook none of these tasks. Our forum was brought into the process in the 11th hour after the board had already reduced the candidate field down to 3 finalists. By not being inclusive and not following the rules prescribed for this search, the process was compromised from the start. The forum interviewed the 3 finalists as instructed and made a recommendation to the Board of Ed. That recommendation was not taken, nor did the Board of Ed ask us to reconvene to provide them with our feedback on the candidates. The panel attempted to address our differences of opinion with the board. On August 8th, in an email to the board chair, a meeting was requested with the Board of Ed. She responded in less than an hour that it was not feasible. Then, at the Board of Ed meeting on August 22nd, another request to meet was made to the entire board in writing. Prior to today, that request had not been responded to. So, our forum incorporated our concerns, including the question of why the board did not follow its policies, into a letter addressed to the board chair dated September 7th. It was intended for this letter to be read into the record tonight at the regularly scheduled Board of Ed meeting. However, the September Orange Board of Ed meeting was canceled at the last minute by the board chair and the superintendent, reportedly due to a light agenda. That letter has been disseminated to all parties concerned, including all Orange Board of Ed members, Superintendent Tim James, First Selectman Jim Zioli, members of the press, and now you, the parents of this district. When it was apparent that there were some fundamental issues with this search process and the forum was given limited information and no consideration, a request was made to the board chair for information regarding the process under the Freedom of Information Act. That will be available to you tonight, along with a cover letter from the board chair responding to the FOI request. As you will note in the packet, she clearly states, and I quote, "The Board of Education took no formal action to establish a search committee," end quote. Also of note in that letter is that apparently the Board of Ed has no quantitative data or ratings on how the candidates were evaluated, as it states that the rating sheets were not compiled or collected from the Board of Ed members. Additionally, at the end of the letter, it states that they do not even have the written recommendation from our forum, as they discarded it. At the end of the day, this is about right and wrong and following the rules. And if you're prepared to look the other way when they're broken, then where does it stop? Without rules in our society, there would be chaos. So when they are broken, there must be consequences. hiring a superintendent may be the most important task that a board can undertake, and that duty cannot be taken lightly. The individuals entrusted with overseeing this process and following the policies put in place to protect the integrity of the search need to be accountable for the mismanagement of this process. One of the reasons people move to Orange is for the exceptional school system. It's a staple of our community, and we want the best education possible for our children. To let the system deteriorate even in the slightest bit is unacceptable. Thank you. And that's our prepared statement, and what we have is copies of the letter that went out to the Board of Ed, along with copies of the policy and the cover letter from the board chair. Pass these around. And I think Mike and I would be happy to answer any questions from anybody. Are there any? Sure. Yes, sir.
I have a few questions. Is this, what you just read, going to be published in the papers?
I mean, it's a public statement. It's available if any of the members of the press want it. So,
Has the new superintendent signed a contract?
yes.
So I see it that we cannot do anything about it. It's a done deal.
I think that ultimately the decision to what to do is up to the people of this community. That's why we wanted to bring this to the public's attention, and it's going to be up to the people if they want to do something about it. According to what we have, the rules were not followed, and if the rules aren't followed, there has to be some sort of consequences. So I don't know about that.
The superintendent position, just in case anybody's wondering, as far as I know, is the highest paid position in the town of Orange. The contract that has been signed, as you suggested, sir, pays the new superintendent $140,000 a year. And it's a term that runs from January of 2012 until June 30th of 2014. And one of the concerns that we have is that with that type of salary, the benefits are good too. There was a process to follow. And what gets us is the fact that the process just wasn't followed here. Our forum was established well after the candidate field was narrowed. And it could not be considered the search committee that's mandated under the bylaws of the Board of Education here in Orange. There's a process to follow, and I think that the reason we have this process in place is because this is a very important position in our town. As Mike said, people come to Orange. One of the reasons people come to live in Orange is because of the school system, and we don't want this to sound as an attack on the superintendent who's been chosen. That's not what this is about. This is about the process that was not observed by the Board of Education. A process that I might add was in place when the last superintendent was hired, and a process that was respected when the last superintendent was hired back in 2005. The policy that Mike referred to, the search committee policy, was adopted by the Board of Education in 2003. They used that process when they hired our current superintendent, but they didn't follow that process for this hiring process, and we want to know why, and nobody's answered that question.
Mr. Bowler, right?
Yes.
Can you tell us, in regards to the policy about the search committee, who was or was not, as you feel, on the forum that should have been, according to this policy?
Well, the forum was established after the fact. It can't be considered the search committee. The search committee, under Section 2141P of the provisions of the Board of Education, provides that the search committee can consist of up to 4 members of the Board of Education, plus, I believe, a teacher representative, a community representative, and an administrative representative. Our search committee had 3 at-large members, Mike, myself, and another gentleman who wasn't here tonight, a PTA representative, a teacher, and a principal. But we unlike the search committee provisions of section 2141P, we were not involved in the recruitment of the candidates. We were not involved in the initial screening of applicants. We received no training as required under the provision for the screening of applicants. And we believe that essentially at the end of the day, our recommendation was ignored by the Board of Education.